Hello everybody, welcome back to the Sales on Demand show. Today is a special bonus episode that is, it's not going to have anything to do with business or selling or print on demand whatsoever. This is going to be all about the COVID lockdowns and the government restrictions that are currently making my life much more difficult than it needs to be. So I have talked about this before in parts of episodes, but this is just going to be one entire episode all about this. I'm going to be throwing a lot of facts at you guys, a lot of information. If this isn't your thing, I don't blame you. I mean, honestly, I've basically turned off social media just so I don't have to hear about anything that the government is doing and how they're planning on just, making my life harder. I've just basically had to disconnect from that, but this is a little bit of a cathartic exercise for me. I need to just tell you some information. And if I don't, I'm literally going to explode. I have gotten a lot of people saying that they appreciate me talking about this. So I haven't had anybody say that they don't want to hear about this. So I'm going with the people that have expressed encouragement on this, and I'm going to be talking about it. And then later on this week, I'll be releasing a regular, normal episode that's just, all about normal business stuff with a focus on moving forward. But for now, this is going to be all about lockdowns, and if you don't want to listen to it, then I'm not going to blame you. So let's go back 12 months ago. We went into this lockdown after being told that COVID was this enormous risk and that it could kill 2 million people in the United States and all this stuff. We all remember it, at least most of us do. And then everybody talked about how it was just 2 weeks sitting on a couch, and are you a pansy? You can't stay inside for just 2 weeks. Your grandparents stormed the beaches of Normandy. They stormed the beaches of Juno Beach. They died in World War II, and you can't sit on a couch watching Netflix? What are you, soft? Yeah, Americans have become a lot more soft, literally. We'll talk about that later on. I want to give a shout out to Tom Woods, Dr. Tom Woods, who has also talked about the COVID mania a lot, and his work is very, very well supported. And of course, he has been widely, repeated in amongst people who, like myself, are opposed to these lockdowns for good reason. So I'll be linking to his show in the show notes. It's, of course, tomwoods.com. Many of you guys know about Tom Woods, but if you don't, you should. You should know that his work has encouraged mine. He actually is kind of a friend of mine, I guess. I would love to say that we're at least acquaintances. He knows who I am, and he's encouraged me in starting the podcast and working on the trading that I'm doing, and I owe a lot of this to him. So, just throwing that out there. Of course, if you're interested in hearing more about what I do with Print on Demand, you can visit this website, salesondemandshow.com/AZ, and learn more about how I make over $100,000 a year in sales on Amazon and Etsy using print on demand. So go ahead and visit that site now. Learn more, join my email list, and you won't regret it. All right, so Alberta has been slowly tightening what I cannot stop for myself from referring to as a noose. It's a noose around the neck of the people who live here, along with Ontario and Quebec. Ontario has just announced a stay-at-home order where there's a curfew, and basically they've locked off the entire... They've basically put the entire population of, I think there's about 13, 14 million people in Ontario. Every single person is in prison in their own house. They're not allowed to go to work. They're not allowed to operate their business. You're only allowed to leave home for exercise, for foods, for a few things. So it's a de facto prison sentence, and that's pretty awful. Alberta isn't quite there yet, but the politicians and the bureaucrats who run Alberta have been making noises about further restrictions because cases are rising, and they're actually rising quite dramatically. But here's the thing: the cases are rising, but the hospitalizations are lagging significantly from where they were before, and the deaths, they're basically flat. We're getting the same number of deaths per day that we were almost for the last 6 months. There hasn't been a huge increase in deaths because medical professionals know how to fight COVID. They know how to keep people alive. And more people who have been getting COVID and would have died a year ago are surviving COVID. So that's good news. That should be good news. So here in Alberta, we have medical capacity. We have so let's begin with the basics. We have socialized medicine here. So the government controls the medical system in its entirety. There is almost zero private medical services at all. The government takes the money from the people and funds the service. Now, since March of last year, we have been hearing about protecting our medical system, protecting our public health infrastructure, and not a single word about increasing capacity. In the beginning, it was all about flattening the curve, right? So that we knew that the same number of people were going to get infected, but we wanted to spread that out over a longer period of time so that all those people would not be in the hospital at the same time. We understood that we weren't going to stop the virus. The virus was not going to go away. It was a brand new virus, and theoretically, nobody had ever been exposed to this same virus, so we had no natural immunity. That might not have been true, but we didn't know it at the time. So flattening the curve was basically spreading these cases out, and the government enacted a lockdown and kept everybody indoors. We saw a little bit of a spike in April. It was really nothing. And then by summer, we were basically back to something that resembled normal life. The gym was open. Summer camps and all the fun stuff was canceled. But at least we kind of, it was almost like it was fading in our memories. But then, there was a baseline number of infections, maybe 100 a day here in Alberta, which continued all through the summer. And the government continued to push this and make noise about it, but it really wasn't affecting people. Nobody was really paying attention to it because it was clearly not a crisis. On the other hand, mask mandates started coming into place. Private businesses started demanding that you wear a mask. Walmart started demanding that people wear a mask. And people started just doing it on their own, which is fine. I don't have any issue with people wearing masks on their own. So mask compliance went up and up and up. And by September, there were 2 major cities that had bylaws requiring masks in every single public building, and mask compliance reached 97% by September here in Alberta. 97%. So only 3% of people were not abiding by mask mandates. Beginning in October and peaking in December, cases of COVID spiked something like 10 times the normal rate over the summer. So they went from 100 cases a day to somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2,000 new infections per day, which of course the infections are being declared by a test that you take, the PCR test. We all know the problems with the PCR test, that they're not detecting infections, they're detecting traces of virus. So you might not have actually been infected, you might have been attacked by the virus, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily have an infection. Nevertheless, they were, let's call them infections if that's what you want. So we had 2,000 per day, and the government freaked out and put us into a strict lockdown, closed the gyms again, ended school for children early, And 3 days later, cases started to decline, and they continued to decline all through January and February, and finally ended in a nice low point in March. And then they started rising again. So what changed? Nothing changed. Nothing changed at all, because the restrictions were never loosened. And I've had discussions with people, and they've tried to make the case that, oh, people visited their family. Yes, people visited their family, because apparently, spending time with family might be important, and people make decisions about risk that, they're like, okay, well, I know I'm taking a slight risk doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's important to me. Kind of like when you go skiing, you know that you might slam into a tree, but it's fun to ski. So you put on the skis and you go to the top of a mountain and slide down, risking death, basically. So that's what people were doing, and there's been all kinds of discussions on Facebook. I've had so many discussions about this. But let's talk about why these lockdowns are so awful. There's just never been a time in history like this. I've never seen anything like this in my life. It's like all of the rights and privileges that we just took for granted. The ability to just open up a business and have people come in and buy from us. That has been literally taken away. And there's the government is pretending to compensate business owners for this. But the truth is that 40% of the businesses that are closed by these COVID restrictions are not going to open again. Or they're going to open again, but they're going to have so much debt that they're probably going to close within the next 2 years. 40%. So we basically put a death sentence on almost half of the businesses that people have worked hard to create. They've invested their own money in there. And what does that say about the ability of people to start a business? Would you start a business if you knew that the government could at any time come and just close your business down and basically sentence you to bankruptcy? Would you take the risk to do that, knowing that that was probably going to be the result? Why would anybody do that? That would be stupid. So we have completely changed the incentive structure of people starting new businesses. Why would anybody want to start a business in 2021, knowing that the government has the power at any time? And we don't know that this is the end of this. We don't know if they're going to revive COVID in the winter. COVID is clearly a seasonal disease. We have a vaccine now, but that hasn't stopped the lockdowns. In fact, the lockdowns are getting more and more restrictive, even with a vaccine that, well, the vaccine rollout in Alberta is pretty pitiful. We have about a third the people vaccinated that the United States does. But we do have the most vulnerable people vaccinated. So why are we still pretending that this matters? Anyway, so there's never been a time in history like this. The incentive structures are all changed. So I was commenting on Facebook, and I said something that some people found offensive, and I said that imagine thinking that trying to give 81-year-old people 6 months more life means we should steal 2 years of activities from kids, because I was very angry that they were canceling summer camp and they're canceling youth sports. They're just canceling everything that makes childhood fun, right? And they're basically forcing kids indoors to just basically watch Netflix and play video games all day. They won't let kids, it's illegal right now for children to visit each other's houses. It's actually illegal to do that. Now, thankfully, they come to their senses about playing outdoors, and they recognize that there is no outdoor transmission that's worth even talking about, and that children are perfectly safe to play outdoors, and they're even allowing school to continue, although they're basically forcing the kids to wear masks for the entire school day, which has got to be absolutely miserable for most kids. They won't let kids play outside at recess together. We basically took our son out of school. We're doing the online school thing because there's just it just seems torturous to send him into that environment. And we can do much better teaching him at home with basically some online school and some, regular ordinary homeschool, which we've done before. And since I work from home, it's actually pretty easy for me to be involved in that quite a bit. And I plan to actually teach my son some things. I'm very happy about our doing this. I think it's the right thing to do. So I commented that we are attempting to steal life from the youth and to give it to people who have already lived a full life. It's almost like daylight savings, We cut the bottom of a blanket off and sew it to the top to try and make the blanket longer. And people were incensed. I had someone say that, this is rude. How can you say this? And then someone else said, well, kids don't need these activities. They can play in the backyard. And I just found that to be the most insufferable thing that I have ever heard. It basically shows what we think of our children. And I pointed out to this person, who is a friend of mine, I said, can you imagine if somebody tried to take away your motorcycle? Because this guy loves riding his motorcycle. But motorcycles are really dangerous, right? So imagine the government said, well, motorcycle riding is so dangerous that we cannot allow you to get on your motorcycle and risk, going to the hospital and, taking hospital time and spending money on, a motorcycle accident for you. You can't ride your motorcycle. You have to drive cars. You don't need a motorcycle. You can walk. You can ride a bike. You can drive a car. Those are all much, much safer. So he didn't get it. He didn't get it because we don't care about children. We remember our own childhood when we were just playing in the backyard, but the idea that we can just basically torture our children and justify it because we're trying to make sure that, people who are on death's door can live another 6 months, that it's perfectly justified to do that. And we aren't even succeeding at giving those 81-year-olds more life. It is very obvious at this point that none of these interventions have saved anyone's life. Maybe the best you could say is that it reduced the number of infections by 10% maybe, or that it delayed some of the infections a little bit. Maybe it delayed them by 2 weeks or something like that. But it didn't actually save anyone's life, and we can tell that because when you compare two different countries with two very, very, very different interventions for COVID, such as Sweden compared to the United Kingdom, you see that the number of infections that each country has follows a very predictable curve, and that it doesn't matter how many interventions there are in the United Kingdom. There's the same number of infections per capita, basically, as there are in the United Kingdom, as there are in Sweden. So we are killing our youth and giving no more life to the 81-year-olds. And I say 81-year-olds because that's the average age of death from COVID. So I had a few more comments. Someone said to me, and this was my favorite comment. I was so glad that he said this because it just shows the inability of people to actually think rationally about society. And they said, we imagine trading lives for entertainment. Imagine trading lives for entertainment. And I said to him, don't you play rugby? Aren't you a big fan of playing sports? I said, what about the risk of injury from playing sports? Did you know? And I looked this up as soon as he said this. I said, yes, we do. We absolutely trade lives for entertainment. 12,000 youth, which is anyone under 24, according to this study. 12,000 people under 24 die every year from playing sports. Sports-related injuries kill 12,000 people every single year. That is a lot of people. That actually surprised me immensely, because we are trading people's lives for literally entertainment. Nobody needs to play rugby to survive. It is purely for fun. Same with soccer and football. Football is famous for maiming children. It is like world famous for causing concussions, which of course isn't included in the 12,000 dead, because concussions don't kill you. They just basically make you stupider for the rest of your life. So the 12,000 dead doesn't even include the people who are basically maimed by sports. And yet, if you dared to shut down sports because of those 12,000 deaths, you would have a literal riot. People would riot as a reaction to that. And justifiably so, because we absolutely do trade lives for entertainment. People will go skiing, which is an extremely dangerous sport. There's been many, many, many high-profile cases of people like running into trees, running off, skiing off the path, falling down cliffs, and basically dying for skiing, which is entertainment. There is no societal value to skiing in the sense that, it produces food, clothing, or shelter. It's just entertainment. And yet we are willing to have people die for entertainment. There's just no other way to put this. We absolutely make sacrifices to have a society where we are allowed to be entertained. So the idea that we don't trade lives for entertainment or for enjoyment is false. We went back and forth on this a little bit, and then he said, I take steps to make sure that I don't get injured. It's like, okay. And are those steps successful? 12,000 people still die. They wear helmets in football, but 12,000 people still die, buddy. You think those 12,000 lives don't matter? So I really ragged on him about that, and he had nothing to say about it. And he is a friend of mine, but I wanted to drive home the point that that this is there is no precedent for this. There is no precedent for the idea that we cannot allow someone to die of disease, that we must prevent all death from some cause, because it's not a calculation that we make for any other factor of our society. We absolutely trade lives and we sacrifice them for the conveniences that we enjoy. Motor vehicles are a great example as well. Every single year in Alberta, 400 plus people die in motor vehicle collisions. That doesn't sound like a lot of people. Out of 4 million people, 400 die in collisions. In the United States, it's 40,000, give or take. And driving is becoming safer, that's true. Technology has really improved the safety of driving, but people still die. Now you multiply that 400 lives times 80 years, which is the average lifespan of a human, call it 80 years, and you get a very different number. You get a lifetime chance of dying in a car accident, which is 1 in 150. So the actual lifetime chance of you dying in a collision is quite significant, because you don't stop driving just because you get, you basically are driving your entire life. So this is an ongoing risk to every single person who gets into a vehicle. And then, of course, people will say, well, these aren't contagious things. It's like, well, yeah, it is. Not everybody who dies in a collision is the one who made the mistake. People are all the time. They're killing other people in collisions. Like, you don't know if you're going to be the one to have the accident. You don't know if someone's going to run a red light and just basically cut your car in half at an intersection. You absolutely are at the mercy of people doing stupid things when you drive. So that is very applicable and comparable to COVID. Because everybody thinks that this is so much worse because COVID is contagious. Well, killing people in a motor vehicle is contagious as well. You can easily die from someone else's mistake, and you can't prevent that. You can't stop that giant cement truck from not paying attention at the light and plowing through 7 or 8 cars before it stops. I mean, I've seen video of cement trucks or dump trucks just not slowing down at an intersection, killing like 5 or 6 people in one giant smash. It's crazy. I don't know. So we have lost the ability to balance risk. And I blame the media and I blame government. I blame the system for screaming at us about this all year long. So here's some more stats on COVID that you should know about as it relates to basically other health risks. Okay, so this is something that I just found out today, and it's really, this is a devastating statistic, okay? And you should absolutely take this and throw it in your friends' faces when they talk about lockdowns and how we saved so many lives with lockdowns. We did not save lives with lockdowns. Okay? And I'm going to prove that to you with actual data here. We are killing people with these lockdowns. Here's how. 42% of US adults gained weight in 2020. And the average weight gain was, okay, are you ready for this? The average weight gain for 42% of US adults was 29 pounds. That is astonishing. I mean, that's just, even if those 42 people were a healthy, normal weight prior to the pandemic, which we know that they were not. We know that they were not. They have gone from basically overweight to physically and medically obese. 29 pounds. If for a person with a healthy, normal weight, the BMI that you're supposed to have, for males, it's usually your BMI should, or I don't know how to say this BMI, but your percentage of body fat should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15%. So when you go beyond that, the weight gain increases your risk of death by around 30% and shortens your lifespan by 3 years on average, okay? Now that's average. I'm surprised it's actually that's short, or that it's not more than that. But the average person, when they gain that much weight, it shortens their lifespan by about 3 years on average. So if 42% of U.S. adults lose 3 years each, the collective number of years lost is 600 million years of life lost. 600 million years of life lost because of that weight gain. Okay? 600 million years of life have been lost. That is more than 600 times the number of years lost due to COVID. Each COVID death is about 1.5 years of life lost. I mean, it could be a little bit more than that. I don't know for sure. It's very hard to find statistics on this. But assuming each COVID death reduces that person's lifespan by 1.5 years, they would have lived 1.5 years longer. For some people, it's less than that. For some people, it's more than that. But this seems like an average. This is the last number I saw. Okay? That's the number of people who died from COVID the number of people who are going to die because of the weight gain from lockdowns is 600 times the number of people, the number of life lost, the years of life lost from COVID. 600 times. That's just the weight gain. That doesn't include the number of years of life lost from missed cancer screenings. So here's another thing. I don't have this in front of me, but the United Kingdom did a study that said that more people would die from missing cancer screenings that, basically detect early cancer. So, there's a predictable amount of cancer that occurs in people every year. And a lot of people will go and get cancer screenings, just regular screenings, and their cancers will be detected, and they'll treat the early cancer, which basically saves their life. It gives them, I think someone said it gives them an average of 10 years more life. If you, especially with like colon cancer and stuff like that, which again is a huge factor caused by obesity. Obesity increases your risk of cancer significantly. So, those missed cancer screenings, and they are being missed because the government has canceled them. Okay, they're not being missed because people aren't trying to get in there to do these cancer screenings. They are being skipped because the government has said, no, you cannot, go in to get your cancer screening. And that is pretty much what's happening in Canada and in the UK, where the government runs the healthcare system. We have government-run healthcare here. And if you ever were looking for an argument against government-run healthcare, this would be a good one. Is that the government is basically saying, no, we want you to die of cancer rather than COVID. And we want more of you to die of cancer than COVID. We want more of you to die of everything than COVID, because COVID is the only thing that matters. And here's the trouble with public health policies. The people who are looking and making these policies, they're looking at one metric. So our Lord and Savior, Dr. Fauci, sitting on his throne, he looks at a single factor. He says XXX number of people are in the hospital or getting COVID or dying of COVID. And then he says, here is a policy that will fix that problem. Okay? We will lock the population down. We won't let anybody go to work. We won't let them go out. We'll make sure that, all of these, activities that, create life, that people are, basically living, all of the human life that we have, we're going to just put that on pause for 12 months or until COVID disappears. And then the idea is that we're reducing the number of people dying from COVID, and they claim victory. But they are completely incapable, or maybe unwilling, to see the larger picture, which is all of the things that I told you. That, the lockdowns are making people gain weight because they're not going out and getting exercise, and gyms are literally being forced closed. You are not allowed to go to a gym. And I've had people say, well, you can exercise outside. And I literally want to take those people and punch them in the face. I just want to take them and hang them on a hook and let them dangle from their collar for about 24 hours. Because it is the dumbest thing in the world to say. I live in Canada, and it's cold here, it's miserable. A lot of people, if the only exercise they can get outside is in the cold, they're not going to exercise. We want to encourage people to exercise. We don't want to make it harder, because we know that 78% of people who die from COVID are obese. 78% of people who die from COVID are obese. When you close down gyms and workout facilities, when you close them down to stop the spread of COVID, you are basically increasing the number of people who will die from COVID. From COVID, not just from, the other health effects of being obese, but from COVID. It doesn't take that long for people to gain weight and become unhealthy, right? So the people back in March, if back in March of 2020, you were relatively healthy, and you didn't get to go to the gym, you didn't get your workouts in, you didn't get any exercise or activity, and you gained 29 pounds, that actually puts you at much higher risk of dying from COVID. Much higher risk. So these public health policies and lockdowns, they are basically, it's a death cult. I know that the Democrats have accused the Republicans of being a death cult. And I've even been accused of being part of a death cult because I dared to go and visit my family, which just blows my mind. The notion that wanting to go and see people that you are related to, that you love, that you care about, is a death cult, that is Looney Tune Town. That's like upside down world. It's like saying, what, you're eating broccoli? Do you want to die? You should be eating McDonald's, you retard. I'm sorry for using the R word, but I mean, that's just how I feel about that. So, to put a long story short, these lockdowns, they're awful. And I've been fighting it every step of the way. But I have come to the conclusion that nobody's listening. I mean, I keep talking about it on my Facebook, I keep talking about it on Twitter, and I'm going to keep talking about it on the podcast as long as it's lasting. But if you were out there and you're on the fence about these lockdowns as to whether they have any effect, you should understand they are killing people. These lockdowns are murdering people. And they're doing it in a sneaky way. If the lockdown saved 10% of people from dying from COVID, they are killing 100 to 200 to 300 times more people from the unintended consequences of the lockdowns. And I'm not even referring to the businesses that have been destroyed and the number of people that are going to die from stress. Stress can kill you. Yeah, stress can kill you. I have felt so much stress this year that I am quite sure that I'm putting myself at risk of some kind of negative health effect just from the stress of hearing about every time I turn on Facebook, every time I look at a television or anything like that, the TV is screaming at me about COVID. That has caused more stress in 2020 and 2021 than I have felt in probably 20 years. This has been the most stressful year of my life, without any exception whatsoever. I mean, even when I was trying to get clean off alcohol, it wasn't as stressful as this year has been. So, is this a black pill? Am I trying to make you feel like everything is so awful that you should just, go and burn down your local state government? No, of course not. I've decided, and this is basically me saving my own life by doing the best I can. I'm going to just live my life. And if a store owner, if I walk in and they say, I want you to wear a mask, I'll wear a mask. I'm going to go out and I'm going to keep running. I've been training for a half marathon this year. I think I can do it. Never done it before, but I have goals, man. I need to do this for my health. And I was running the other day. I was doing a 5K run. I was trying to set a new record for my best 5-kilometer run time. And I reached 4 kilometers. And I was like, I don't think I can do another kilometer at this pace. I was pretty wiped by that 4th kilometer. And I just thought, another kilometer at this pace is going to hurt. And yet I knew that I was going to make it because I've done this before. I've made it through all kinds of struggles and tragedy, and I'm going to make it through this one too. And so are you, right? I am lucky enough, fortunate enough, blessed enough to work from home. God has really blessed my family with all kinds of, I'm making more money now than I've ever made before. I've been able to see my family. None of them have been impacted by these lockdowns in any serious way. None of my family have lost their jobs. And basically, I'm taking as much money as I can and just giving it to food banks and stuff, giving it to my church to try and keep people off of the streets. Make sure that my pastors aren't, losing their home or something crazy like that. I'm going to fight these lockdowns by doing good things for other people. I cannot change the government. I have no control over that. It's beyond my physical ability to control it. But I do have control over my own reaction to it. I can be angry about it and sit here and sulk and just think that my life sucks and that everything is awful, or I can get out there and just work harder than I've ever worked before, and I can endure. And I will endure. It frustrates me that this is what I'm left with, but this is what I'm left with, is that I am going to endure this. And I don't even really see these politicians as being my enemy. I mean, on one hand, I kind of do, because they are evil people. But I look at the system as being evil. These people are just, they're part of the system. The system is designed so that it brings these petty dictators and puts them in charge. So the system is to blame. And I'm like, okay, would this be different if someone else was in charge? Right now, Alberta has a conservative government. We've basically got somebody who is basically Donald Trump as the premier of Alberta. And yet, he is doing exactly the same thing as any other Democrat, or we have a party here called the New Democratic Party. They're basically the Democrats, on steroids. They would be doing exactly the same thing, just more of it. They would just be harder on us. So I don't trust any of these politicians with any aspect of my life. I am going to control my own life. I'm not going to get angry at people. I'm not going to sit here and rage against them. I'm just going to fight the system. And if I can, I'll do everything I can to overturn this system. So I'm going to be continuing to donate to political parties like the Libertarian Party of Canada in hopes that the Libertarian Party can start making some inroads here. We do have a Libertarian Party in Canada, and they're non-existent. They barely exist. I mean, I like Tim Moen, who is the chairman of the Libertarian Party in Canada, but I don't even know what he's doing right now. Like, I follow him on Twitter, I never see him tweet. So I'm not sure what's going on, but if I can, I'm going to fight this system. But more than that, I'm just going to continue improving my life. And I'm going to pray for the people who are really suffering under these policies. Because I'm really not suffering as badly as they are. And I have to keep a little bit of perspective. Because if I don't, I'm going to think of myself as being the victim and forget about the people who really are victims. So, I want to leave you with this. I want to leave you with some hope. This is going to end. It's going to be miserable. It's going to get harder before it gets better, but it's going to get better. I have never been so happy to live in this century because 100 years ago, we didn't have an internet. We didn't have the ability to make a living from home. If you wanted to make a living, you had to get out there and, build a store and start selling like sacks of grain or something like that. It was costly and it was hard work, and you could earn an honest living, but it was challenging. And all of the technology that makes our lives more comfortable, it didn't exist 100 years ago. It barely existed 50 years ago. There was no internet, TV had 3 channels. Our lives are objectively better in 2021 than they've ever been in the history of planet Earth. If you measured the year 2020 against all of the worst years of just the 20th century, it wouldn't even make the top 50 of the worst years. 2020 was bad, But I mean, 1939 was worse, right? 1968 was worse. There was a lot of terrible things that have happened in history, and this isn't one of the worst of them. So I'm trying to keep that perspective and just stop thinking about this so much. It's hard. It's very hard. Every time I have a moment free, my mind just goes there. But I'm working on it, and I encourage you to work on it as well. Do what you can to change people's minds. If you're on the fence, then look at the data that I've given you and make a decision about this. But don't dwell on it too much, because you can't change it. You can try, but ultimately these politicians are going to just do what they want. Now that's going to affect how we look at them going down the road. You need to start looking at these politicians and these people as being basically part of a system that is out to destroy you. And you need to resist every move they make, no matter who it is. I don't care if another Donald Trump gets into office. You need to resist everything he does that is not leaning towards freedom. Everything. All right, so that's enough for today. Going to have another episode releasing probably tomorrow. It's going to be all about how to make an email list using Etsy. And this is going to be a great one for you guys. If you are an Etsy seller, you want to tune in for the next episode, which is going to be, I believe, episode 105. We're going to be talking about email lists. But for now, I leave you with this. This is something from the Bible. It says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Cheers.